we here? Where is the move of the motion? Order. Order. Now move on to the next debate. Claire Hanna to move the motion. Yes. Claire Hanna to move the motion. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chair. It's a pleasure to serve under chairmanship and a pleasure to have the opportunity to highlight the impact of some of the changes introduced earlier this year by the previous government and how they are landing with public services and the economy in Northern Ireland. I appreciate, as with any set of rules, there will be winners and losers. But they have had a negative impact in many areas, and I think it's important to ensure that the specific consequences for our region are factored into the current review. Flexibility and understanding of regional differences is important to ensure that we build a system that allows businesses to grow, allows wages to rise, while hopefully the Stormont Executive and the UK Government's missions get a grip on our skills shortages. From the outset, I'll just say I appreciate that for many the issue of immigration is vexed and politically contested, certainly here, and I don't propose that we spend this hour talking about that in generalities, but for what it's worth, I will say the Social Democratic and Labour Party that I represent is internationalist and pro-worker and pragmatic, and we want to see a fair immigration system that enriches our society and our economy and which allows talented people to be able to come and build a life, as many Irish people have done around the world for many generations. We also appreciate that people see challenges of infrastructure and services, and housing shortages are often cited, but we contend that the problem is that the proven value and economic impact of overseas workers in the UK economy hasn't in the past been properly directed and spent in health and housing and transport, but that overall I think statistics bear out the fact that this aspect of immigration has washed its own face economically, and we're quite determined that decent and essential workers don't carry the can of years of failure to invest those gains properly. It's also a fact that our economic reliance on immigration is in part a consequence of inadequate skills investment, and I firmly support the aim of training and properly rewarding a local workforce. But these rules and changes that hopefully come have to deal with the economy that we have and not just the economy that we want to create. So while the scope and parameters of immigration are a legitimate subject of debate, and I respect the right of any government to devise policy, I think the current framework is detrimental to our local economy and services. I'm going to focus specifically on the 5-point plan that James cleverly announced in December 2023, which came into effect earlier this year, and in the hope that the government will reform aspects of those. Like many, I believe that those changes were electorally motivated. They were a last roll of the dice for a government on the way out, and the minds that brought you the Rwanda scheme and other things, and that didn't necessarily fit in with economic needs. So those changes are the prohibition on dependence of social care workers, the increase in the baseline minimum salary for a skilled worker visa, the shortening of the list of eligible roles on the immigration salary list, the increase in threshold for a partner visa to 29,000, with proposals to increase that further next year, and the changes to the graduate visa, which the Migration Advisory Committee found no significant abuse and recommended maintenance. I also want to briefly set the context of the Northern Ireland economy. Overall wages are lower in Northern Ireland, a median full-time average of around 32,900 versus I think about 35,000 for the UK generally, and from the get-go that differential impacts businesses in different ways. We of course share a land border with the rest of Ireland, and while Brexit has made Labour mobility more complicated than it had been. There is a lot of such movement, with thousands of people crossing the border for work every day, and certainly that means that there's competition for talent. So with an open and dynamic economy, the Republic of Ireland have still consistently invested in skills and education, even through the crash years, and created real opportunities to attract talent, and that hasn't been the case in the north. So by comparison, many northern businesses struggle on that basis, and increasingly public services do as well, with growing numbers of healthcare workers fleeing our truly broken system for the opportunity to work down south with better standards of care and better rates of pay. Sadly, one of Northern Ireland's top exports continues to be our young people. We invest hundreds of thousands of pounds in their primary and post-primary education, with many then feeling the need to move to Britain or to the Republic in search of a university place, which we artificially cap, or better career opportunities, or for many, a more stable and tolerant society. And that is the real immigration problem that Northern Ireland needs to grapple with. I appreciate that not all of this is within the Minister's remit, but it was important to set the environment that local Northern Irish businesses are operating in, and therefore the context of the further squeezes these changes are applying. So as I say, they weren't designed to support our economy or public services, and the negative impact is felt economically and also in terms of the myths they propagate. Just last week, a small child in my constituency was injured by broken glass caused by masonry being thrown through the window of their family home, which they share with a health worker parent, due to race hate, which reached a crescendo in many places, including my constituency, in August. And I think that was in very large part due to hype coming from the media and at times from this Parliament. The parent of that child is one of 12,000 immigrant workers in the Northern Ireland Health and Social Care system, and thank God for them. Many are nurses and doctors, and many are social care workers. The average wage for a care worker is £11.58 per hour. That's pennies above the minimum wage, lower than many retail or hospitality jobs, and with understandably higher turnover. So with tens of thousands of vacancies in that sector across the UK, it seemed bizarre that the government made it even less attractive by legislating to separate those workers from their families should they come from overseas. The General Secretary of Unison put it well when she said that the government were playing roulette with essential services to placate backbenchers. So it's far from just the public sector. These changes have been raised with me from individual businesses, numerous of them, and representatives of sectors including manufacturing, hospitality, transport, fishing and parts of agriculture, some of which, it's fair to say, are dominated by entry-level and casual work, and I support all the efforts to organise and support workers within those sectors. One sector that's been strangled by lack of access to workers and exacerbated by these changes is the mushroom industry in Northern Ireland. Mushroom workers are still limited to seasonal agriculture workers visas, which are restricted to a 6-month stay for workers who come through that route, but with a training window of several months to get to the required levels of skill and productivity. They feel that scheme doesn't meet the needs of what is a year-round crop. Those challenges are exacerbated by the proximity of the industry to the border and the light and day difference between how farms in the south are compared. Yes, I'd be delighted to.
Member for giving way. She's highlighting some of the issues with the seasonal agricultural worker scheme. Does she agree with me that one of the challenges of the scheme in recent years and going forward is the fact that it's only been extended on an annual basis? If we want farmers to invest in technology and equipment, we actually need to give them a proper window in order to be able to do so.
Absolutely, and that reflects very much the feedback that I've heard from the people who are trying to increase productivity and to modernise, and I suppose arbitrary frameworks like that aren't helping. As I say, the challenges for northern mushroom farms are exacerbated by the differential investment in similar farming businesses in the south, where there is a bespoke visa available for mushroom sector measure that permits workers from across the globe to remain for 2 years. So in that context, and with additional subsidies and things like energy, and it's a high energy business, how can we expect them to achieve, the shared goal that we all have of locally grown, low carbon footprinted food and profitability? So a key aspect of supporting a thriving industry lies in the hands of the government in ensuring that they have access to labour. Fishing has been similarly impacted. I know my colleague and constituency neighbour Jim Shannon will touch on their plight. This is something we've worked together on consistently over the last mandate. Just this affects a lot of rural and coastal communities who are based very much around fishing. That sector's sectoral body, Seafish's recent paper assessed the impact of the skilled worker visa changes, and it gives a fairly comprehensive breakdown of their reliance on overseas crews and of the operating and profit losses, which suggests just months of viability left for a lot of those vessels. It isn't just food supply at risk, but infrastructure too. Ferries are obviously essential trade routes, as well as moving tens of thousands of people between our islands weekly. Since Brexit, non-national seafarers have no automatic right to work on GBNI routes. So this has impacted companies like Stena Line and their crucial routes into Belfast and Warren Point. They've augmented their UK and Irish crews using frontier worker permits, but these aren't being issued anymore, and that is posing a serious risk to maintaining their current service levels. Those jobs in seafaring are highly skilled and well remunerated, but they have a traditionally global workforce and less of a defined merchant navy pipeline in recent years. This is another industry who are coming with a solution ready to go, and they suggest, similar to the 2022 offshore wellboat workers, a targeted and potentially even time-bound ferry worker concession could avert disruption to this passenger and trade lifeline with almost no cost or impact on the taxpayer, and that would buy the industry time to adjust to all of the post-Brexit frameworks and skills deficits. Chair, I'll turn briefly to the nearly 50% uplift in the skilled worker visa salary as well. Silotank is a Belfast-based manufacturing business who, amongst other things, are helping Northern Ireland Water to safely and sustainably update their antiquated infrastructure, and across Northern Ireland, development has come to a halt. Thousands of houses in planning are being delayed for the want of modern drainage. That business is investing heavily in decarbonising their products with alternative energy sources to their West Belfast plant, but their growth is being limited by a lack of access to qualified technicians, with no adequate engineering pipeline in Northern Ireland presently. Manufacturing NI, the sectoral body, have highlighted a perfect storm for their members. Rapid expansion and manufacturing, I'm pleased to say, is one of our success stories, but we're not making it easy for them in many ways. But that, coupled with a low skill pool and low net migration, they've identified that some 80% of their members have low confidence in their ability to fill skilled roles. And we lament our sluggish productivity, but it is hard, they will find, to invest in an economy with labour shortages. They've advocated resurrecting a sector-based scheme from the last time Labour were in government, which would allow for temporary 12-month opportunities with a plausible £26,200 minimum salary. The fourth recent change was the rise in minimum salary for sponsoring a spouse or a partner, which has gone up to £29,000, set to increase, and which the Migration Observatory called the most restrictive family reunion policy of any high-income country in the world, citing the existence of thousands of Skype families who are unable to be together because of these rules. Family reunion before these changes accounted for some 60,000 people. By definition, they were joining established and earning family units, and having the threshold so high and will go much higher beyond the average earnings if it goes up is forcing many people to choose between their families and their career, which can only have a disproportionate impact on women, and an environment where only the wealthy can choose who they fall in love with. These examples across sectors are the top line of problems, and I think there are fixes and willing partners in industry. There are some low-hanging administrative fixes as the government works through new policies. Those policies, though, do need to, unlike the current one, be based in the reality of the economy and the world we live in and the environment businesses are operating in, particularly in Northern Ireland, which, as I say, is qualitatively different to England in many ways. Northern Ireland Chamber's latest quarterly economic survey confirms that access to skill is a challenge for local businesses across sectors, with 3/4 reporting difficulty recruiting and nearly 40% highlighting negative impact of these changes. These workers themselves face barriers to sustaining and progressing in their employment, and sometimes they face less than decent treatment at work. The Equality Commission highlights that migrant workers are overrepresented in low-paid jobs, certainly in their early years, and uncertainty created by too much change and tightening in the rules creates a deterrent from some employers who are unsure of the legal framework and real difficulties for many in changing jobs. In addition, and quite separately, just before I finish, just while I have the opportunity, reform of work-related visas should, I believe, finally address the unreasonable delay in the right to work for those trapped in a chaotic asylum system. I appreciate that it's a different matter entirely, but we know that it does delay integration. It increases the cost of supporting those people at that time to the public purse. It deprives that person of the dignity of work, and it deprives our economy of often incredibly skilled and entrepreneurial people, which we could absolutely be doing with. This would be in line with the Migration Advisory Committee's recommendations. It would help address labour market gaps and would surely give people the right start to a needed new life. So thank you, Chair. Thank you, Minister, for facilitating this debate, which is, as I say, brought in the spirit of constructive feedback and hopefully fairer and more pragmatic rules in future.
Well done. That this House has considered eligibility for family and work visas. Jazz, you standing? Jazz Athwell. Yes, thank you.
Thank you very much, Chair. And can I first of all congratulate the Honourable Member for Belfast South and Mid Down for securing this debate. She spoke very eloquently and certainly with a lot of knowledge, passion and a real grasp of the issues at hand. And I thank her for the way she's introduced this topic. This is a problem that's impacting local families, not just in Northern Ireland, but families right across the UK. In my own constituency in Ilford South, immigration and visa issues are amongst the most common and issues that people raise with me. And my office this week has had over 15 cases. But as the Honourable Member for Belfast South said, that this is impacting our economy, it's certainly impacting the fabric of our society, and it's tearing families apart. Because people choose to certainly make the United Kingdom their home for many reasons, and often due to close family ties, historic links, pressing needs, and of course, for a better way of life, for which I can testify because my family came here all those 50-odd years ago for a better life. And I'd like to think that we've certainly contributed back to the society here. Unfortunately, as has been highlighted, many face a needlessly hostile system which is rigged with barriers which, in the worst cases, quite literally tear families apart. I think today I'd like to share a story of a single family in Ilford South, one of a fully qualified medical doctor who'd certainly cared for people not only in Pakistan, Saudi Arabia, but had brought his talents here to the UK. A chap called Dr. Siddiqui, one of my residents, spent his whole life helping people and bringing his much-needed skills to the UK. However, Dr. Siddiqui was put in an impossible situation by the system that is really rigged against some of the talent that we're trying to attract. And of course, we had Dr. Siddiqui's wife, who's also a fully qualified doctor, had to make the heartbreaking decision to leave her husband in the UK to look after their severely disabled daughter because the daughter was turned down for the visa. And so we were in risk of losing 2 fully qualified medical doctors. And thankfully, following an intervention, the Home Office reviewed the decision and the Siddiqui family was reunited in Ilford South. However, they first had to endure incredible hardship trying to work through an unknown and often challenging and entirely unnecessary system. The Siddiqui family story has a happy ending, thankfully, but sadly, many other families have not been so fortunate and have remained separated by the complicated and inaccessible visa system. If Dr. Siddiqui had been a social worker, another essential and desperately needed profession, neither his wife nor his disabled daughter would have been eligible to join him here in the UK. And I think that's what we've really got to look into, how we can change that system. We must always remember that with the changes to the eligibility criteria, there are significant human costs as well as economic loss to this great nation. We risk the economic growth of our country, desperately needed by this country, in addition to the very fabric of our society, which we are so much the poorer if we don't actually address the issues raised by the honourable member. Thank you.
Just to remind honourable members, this is a 60-minute debate. There's no formal time limit right now, but can I encourage everybody to think around 4 minutes around that sort of time. Robbie Moore, thank you.
Thank you, Mr Pritchard, and it's a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship. And can I start by congratulating the member for Belford South and Mid Down for securing this important debate. As part of my constituency, I'm proud, Mr Pritchard, to represent a very diverse town of Keighley, where a third of residents are either of Pakistani or Bangladeshi heritage. And as part of the workload of casework constituency that constituency casework that I get coming into my office, a very high volume of that is either visa or immigration-related casework. And that is something that I want to focus on in my contribution in this debate. Because what is most important to me, and indeed my constituents, is that the system is fair. Recently, my office has seen a rise in the use of an immigration loophole through spouse visas that not only make a mockery of the proper procedure for obtaining indefinite leave to remain, but also an additional cost to the taxpayer. And I just want to explore some of the challenges that I'm seeing coming through some of the casework that I'm getting. Under the standard procedure, individuals who are brought to the UK on a spouse visa are granted an initial 2.5 years right to remain. The spouse must then apply and pay for this to be extended for a further 2.5 years. Assuming the relationship does not break down in this period, the individual may then apply for settlement status, again at their own cost, which I think we would all agree is appropriate. But if the relationship breaks down, the visa is void and the individual returns to their country of origin. However, if the spouse reports that they have experienced domestic abuse from their British partner, they are not only allowed to seek settlement status immediately, but the costs are borne by the British taxpayer for this process. Now, let me quickly say that I'm in no way suggesting that honest claimants of domestic abuse should go ignored by authorities or not assisted by the police. Of course, anyone found to have perpetrated domestic abuse should feel the full force of the law, and indeed victims should also receive as much support as necessary. However, of the 9 cases that have been brought to my office recently, in recent months, none of these cases where domestic abuse has been reported have received any further action by the police. And I just want to give a very quick example of one in which a mother of a son whose spouse came across to reside with them received a complaint of domestic abuse being made against not only him but also his wider family, which again the police explored, but resulted in no further action being taken by the police, causing a huge amount of stress to their family. Indeed, some of the claimants of domestic abuse are now being made as early as a few weeks into the arrival of the UK, both by men and women. And what I fear is that even in a loving relationship, a claim of domestic abuse is being used by certain individuals either to accelerate the settlement status or to avoid costs that must be then paid for application of the settlement or through visa extension. And this is wrong, not only to my constituents who go through the system properly and fairly, but also to the wider UK taxpayer, who is then funding a system that encourages the cheapening of the experiences of the genuine domestic abuse cases that would be pursued not only by the police but authorities, but also a loophole that exists to try and enable them to save money. In my view, should a relationship be terminated on the grounds of domestic abuse, the spouse should be returned to their country of origin once the police or any have carried out sufficient investigation or any immediate safety concerns have been addressed. The closing of this loophole is something that I know has wide-ranging support across my constituency, including within the Pakistani and Bangladeshi communities, as we all fear that this is a system that most people use honestly is being abused by a very small minority. And this is something that I would like to just bring to the Minister's attention, as it is something that has been raised by many of my constituents. And I would therefore like to just hopefully express that the Minister will address this in her closing remarks.
Thank you very much, Mr Richard. It's a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship, and I congratulate the member for Belfast South and Mid Down for securing this important debate. I'll keep my remarks limited to a few key points. I would argue that the current system for family and work visas is arbitrary and it doesn't work for anybody. We have shortages in hospitality, we have shortages in care work, we have shortages in medicine and indeed dentistry, as I discussed with the Scottish Government this morning, to name just a few. And I understand the desire to deal with the domestic skills gap as a priority, but I can't just turn round to my local businesses struggling to keep a full rota or to the families on waiting lists for social care and tell them that they just need to wait. And as with others here, I have been contacted by constituents basically distressed at the increase in the earnings threshold for family visas when it was introduced earlier this year. And one constituent wrote to me to tell me that his son had effectively had to emigrate to live with his partner elsewhere, as recent graduates they would not be meeting the threshold for years. That is the brain drain playing out right in front of us. But I want to make some main points, Mr Pritchard, in relation to family reunification visas. And I'd be grateful if the Minister could look into a long delayed application made by one of my constituents, who was granted asylum in March of this year and immediately in April put in the application for his wife and 2 children to join him. He hasn't seen them for years. He misses them, but he's also deeply worried for their safety. My team first contacted the Home Office about this in August, and we were advised that the 24-week turnaround time meant that my constituent could expect a response in October. The Minister will observe that we're now well into November, and if I pass on the details of the case, will they look at what can be done to expedite it and ensure that my constituent's family can be brought back together? The second point I want to turn to on family reunification is under Stage 2 of Pathway 1 of the Afghan Citizens Resettlement Scheme. As the Minister will know, this was opened in the summer after much delay and was welcomed and appreciated by Afghans. However, there are still issues with the scheme which I hope the Minister can respond to today, or otherwise return to her department and write to me at a later point to address. Now, this particular route refers to the separated family members of those who were evacuated under Stage 1 of the pathway, i.e. those who were identified for evacuation from Afghanistan immediately prior to and following the fall of Kabul. The first issue is this time limit, because whilst Afghans were ID'd for evacuation in a relatively short period of time between the 13th and 28th of August, many were unable to access evacuation flights at that time. And I think we can all remember, certainly those of us that were in the House and even those who weren't, the chaos unfolding as the Taliban came closer and closer to the airport. And it actually took until March of the following year for all those identified for evacuation to reach the UK. The ability for them, however, Mr Pritchard, to be reunited with their family is based on being evacuated, not just identified for evacuation, in that very limited August period. And I assume it's got to be an oversight to leave the families out of the scheme for those people who just happen to come a few days, weeks or months later through no fault of their own. And so the second question I want to ask the Minister is to look up into the take-up of the scheme. The application window only opened for a very short period of time, from 30th of July to 30th of October, and the forms are lengthy and the evidence required rightly substantial. And has support been provided to Afghans here and families elsewhere? How is the Home Office responding when families struggle to provide the necessary documentation? Because this is particularly difficult for those families who have fled to Pakistan and may not have access to things like bank statements, marriage certificates and medical records. Will the Home Office consider reopening the application window if it comes to light that this process has not worked, and that families, many of whom served and worked with the UK when we were in Afghanistan, remain separated due to the short time frame and difficulties in meeting those requirements? This debate is wider. It's about many things, many people, many places. But what we are talking about at the heart of it is whether the Home Office is set up to make the processes involved transparent, efficient and effective. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr Pritchard. It's an honour to serve under your guidance this afternoon, and a serious thanks and congratulations to the Honourable Member for Belfast South and Mid Down for bringing a really important issue to this place. It's right that Britain should control its borders and that it should regulate migration effectively, and that we should do it humanely, and we should do it in Britain's own interest. And yet so often I don't think we do that at all. We obsess about the shallow politics of it all, and we ignore practicalities for people involved and for businesses in Britain and the wider economy. So two areas for us to cover. First is about family visas. I want to, and the minimum income requirement there, I want to put to the Minister that she will ensure that the driving principle here is about what people need to earn in order to be able to support a family, not as a ham-fisted way of limiting numbers. The current income floor is £29,000, up from £18,600 under Conservatives. The plan to take it to £38,700 will absolutely divide families, and I want her to consider, I would ask her to consider the impact upon child poverty, on indeed child development, and on family welfare. What will be the impact, will she assess, on the splitting up of children from one or both of their parents, which has absolutely happened in my constituency, talking to constituents near Grange over Sands recently. A gentleman I spoke to in Oxenholme, whose wife, and he and his wife would not qualify under the rules even as they are. Would she look very carefully at making sure that this is not something that destroys families, that splits children from their parent, indeed splits parents from one another? That would be a deeply unpleasant thing for this government to do, having been something which was of course designed by the previous government. And because of time, I'll move swiftly on to the issue of skilled work visas. And again, the threshold is something which is moot and is discussed. And in a letter to me just a few days ago, the Minister said that raising the salary criteria is designed to ensure that resident workers' wages cannot be undercut and ensure that skilled workers' route is not used as a source of low-cost labour. Yes, I completely agree. But will she accept that things are different in some parts of our country? I'll give you a quick run-through. The Lake District is the most populated national park in the country. 80% of the working age population in the lakes is already working in hospitality and tourism. There is no reservoir of talent there for us to delve into. What we desperately need to do is to control the number of second homes and excessive numbers of holiday lets, and create homes for local people, build genuinely affordable homes so we can create a workforce and build our workforce that way. We also need to upskill our young people and stop them leaving our area so they could instead remain in our communities and contribute to the workforce. But there is no doubt whatsoever that a smallish population serving the biggest visitor destination in the country outside of London is always going to need to import labour. And so we will desperately need there to be a consideration here. I will just read out a comment from Cumbria Tourism that serves our community so well and represents businesses right across our area. Their chief tells us that without legal migration, Cumbria, in particular Central Lakes, will suffer in terms of labour shortages. We don't have enough chefs, we don't have enough experienced managers, and we don't have enough people in customer service roles, all roles that we didn't struggle to fill when people with overseas workers were able to take up posts more freely. Just to finish, just to give her a bit of a picture of what this means in a macro level for our economy, 66% of hospitality and tourism businesses in the Lakes and the Dales are operating below capacity because they don't have enough staff. So it's good to control our borders. Let's do so humanely, and let's control our tripartite board is in a way that actually works for Britain rather than damaging our economy.
Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. First of all, can I thank the Honourable Lady for South Belfast and Mid Down for raising the issue. She and I may have some constitutional political differences, but this is a unifying issue for both of us and indeed for the community that we represent. The connectivity across the UK is something which I've raised on multiple occasions over the last number of weeks, and the reason is clear. The lifeblood of Northern Ireland is our ability to trade skills and products on a reciprocal basis with the mainland UK. The ferry system is as vital to that ability as oxygen is to the very lungs that we breathe in this hall today. The current situation is concerning and needs not simply a debate in this pit, but needs action by the government. And we look to the Minister, very much to the Minister, for that assurance that the needs are heard and will receive action and attention. Ferry routes across the Irish Sea are vital national infrastructure that ensure that the trade, the tourism, the essential services flow. Without it, Northern Ireland cannot exist in this modern world. We need that and need it, and Honourable Lady has outlined that as well. I just say this, the insidious Northern Ireland Protocol, difficulty of the haulage companies, the delays in transport highlighted the nature of Northern Ireland, which showed that within days of delayed shipping, shelves were empty. This is a fact of where we are, and our trade is so important. And the Stena lines in particular, who carry that bulk of trade and economy and tourism across the water, is so very important. So it's clear that the ferry routes must be protected and prioritised, as vital infrastructure. And for that reason, I ask today for a commitment of the government and the Minister in particular to engage with Stena and their parent company to find a solution, perhaps using, and I make this as a solution, Mr. Chairman, the offshore wellboat concession as a template that could be used to solve the problem. There's been an understandable focus on the politics and the paperwork of the Windsor framework, yet the offshoot of that has been insufficient thought going into the fact that we have the people within the skills we need in seafaring routes to ensure there's no disruption to trade across the Irish Sea, and their vital role must be protected. If the routes weren't able to operate in the future because we don't have qualified seafarers, then it could lead to empty shelves, lack of certain medical supplies and certain difficulties for my constituents. I'd like to focus upon the second point, if I can, Mr. Chairman. The Honourable Lady referred to being has to do with the fishermen. Last week, and I understand that government has made concessions for horticulture and for farming, and particularly those in the mushroom and the vegetable and the potato as an example. But what they haven't done, government, but what they could do is make those concessions for the fishermen. And it's also a skilled, but it's also a seasonal work as well. For many, I was in Portavogie last Saturday at my bike centre. The farmers or the fishermen came to see me and underlined very clearly the issues. The issues are that they need a seasonal work system that means that they can then bring people in for 8 or 9 months a year. The fish producer organisations last week met the DEFRA Minister. A very constructive meeting, by the way. I spoke to him before we had the debate last week. The Minister himself was hoping to speak to the Minister who's in place today, and I would suggest maybe that those contacts should be made, because I believe there will be a way forward. So I make a plea for the fishing sector and that there will be some help for them. The member for South Belfast and myself did not agree on Brexit. Just say these things, by the way, okay? We didn't agree on the protocol either. And on many other Northern Ireland issues. But I tell you this, on this visa programme, there is a clear uniting issue. And that so often happens, Mr. Chairman. There's things that bring us together. I like to focus upon the things that bring us together. I know the Honourable Lady likes to do that today. We need these crews to operate, and they must be able to continue as they are in Northern Ireland. May well come to a standstill. So I looked at Mr. again to ask for consideration and action. And I'm happy, if necessary, to facilitate a meeting between the fishermen, Stena Line, the Honourable Lady and myself to make it happen. Thank you.
We now come on to the opposition front benches as 5 minutes each, and then 10 minutes for the Minister. Please smile.
Oh, sorry, yes, I forgot that one, please. Thank you very much, Mr Pritchard. It's a real pleasure to participate in this debate with you and the Chair, and many congratulations to the Honourable Lady for securing this important debate. If I am to make only one point today, is that our visa system is broken. It is not fair, it is not fit for purpose, and it's costing us, our economy, our communities, and most importantly, our people. The Liberal Democrats want to see a system that is fair, practical and humane, one that values families, recognises economic realities and ensures that our workforce can meet the needs of the country. The previous Conservative government imposed an arbitrary salary threshold, and it's been mentioned by others, of £38,700 for skilled work visas. And so far, the incoming Labour government has followed their lead. This threshold does not work. It is just a number, and it is detached from the realities of the UK's labour market. Across industries like hospitality and social care, absolutely vital to our society and our economy, salaries are often below this threshold. And by setting this inflexible limit, we are denying skilled workers the opportunity to contribute to our communities and leaving critical roles unfilled. This threshold doesn't just hurt workers, it hurts us all. Because when we drive qualified people away, we end up short-staffed in our NHS, in our schools, in our care homes. Every unfilled position means a longer wait in A&E, a larger class size, or a care home resident left without the help they need. And that's why we Lib Dems are calling for a flexible, merit-based system for work visas. Such a system would allow us to work closely with each sector, responding to their unique needs and ensuring that skilled individuals who meet those needs can come to the UK. We should be assessing visa applicants based on their skills, qualifications and the demand for their expertise, not on an arbitrary figure forced to fit across all industries. But this is just a piece of a larger puzzle, and it must go hand in hand with a long-term workforce strategy. If we want to address labour shortages and skills gaps in a sustainable way, we must invest in developing our own talent for the high-demand sectors. And this is something that the previous government failed to prioritise, and I urge the current Labour government to turn this plan into a reality. We've also urged the government to move control over work visas and policies for international students out of the Home Office, which has repeatedly shown its lack of understanding of the needs of employers and universities. These issues should be put where they belong, in the departments that understand their value. And moving on to family visas, if I may, Mr Pritchard, the Conservatives' decision to increase the minimum income threshold has left many families in a state of deep uncertainty, wondering if they will be split apart simply because a loved one's income doesn't meet an arbitrary requirement. And this is not just a policy failure, it is a failure of compassion. The Liberal Democrats believe that no family should be torn apart by these cruel thresholds. Family life should not be a privilege for the well-off. It is a basic human right. We have therefore called for an immediate reversal of these unfair increases to the income threshold. Families deserve clarity and stability, and we urge the government to act swiftly to address this issue. In short, Mr Chair, the Lib Dems are clear. We can and should have a fair and compassionate visa system that works for people, UK people and people wanting to come here to contribute, not against them. The time has come to move beyond arbitrary numbers and red tape. We should build a system that is rational, humane and responsive to the needs of our society, and a merit-based approach to work visas aligned with practical workforce strategy will help us attract and retain the talent we need. A fair policy on family visas will keep families together, relieving them of unnecessary anxiety and hardship. So I urge the Minister and the Government to abandon many of the policies of the past and support a vision of the UK that values family, fairness and economic common sense. Thank you.
Madam Minister.
Thank you ever so much. It's a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship, Mr Pritchard, particularly in my first responsive debate in my new position. I know this is an issue the Honourable Member for Belfast South and Mid Down has been campaigning on for some time, and although we may not agree, I do applaud her for bringing forward this debate. We have heard today much about the impact of eligibility and criteria from Honourable Members throughout this debate, and again, while we will not always agree, there were some points well made. Ultimately, I believe there is, however, broad agreement across the House and definitely across the country that we need a system that prioritises skills and talent. People are happy to see migration which helps our economy grow and which supports our NHS, whilst encouraging investment in and protecting our resident workforce. And that is why we now have the highest number of nurses ever, and we were able to increase the number of GP appointments from 2019 to 2023 by 50 million. We want a system that rewards those who come to the UK and contribute, whilst ensuring those who are already living here are not negatively impacted. What is paramount is that people feel the system is fair. And this means we must become to migration policies on visa eligibility that provide robust controls to limit migration and prioritise the economic welfare of the UK. To To achieve this, we took a number of previous steps to strengthen the rules, and the success of these measures is already being demonstrated, where we have seen decreases in applications, with 15,200 applications recorded between April and September 2024 following our changes, which was an 83% reduction compared to 6 months before. Applications for dependents are also considerably down, which in 2023 had got to the point where there were 6 dependents for every 1 worker seeking to come to the UK. This dramatic drop underscores the need to adapt our eligibility criteria to provide robust rules and prevent misuse of the system. The significant numbers we saw in the past were excessive, and we had to take action to get them down. The new government has maintained our changes to the system, and clearly we both agree that the policy is working, or perhaps the Minister will announce that she's changing the strategy today. However, I would ask the Minister for her assessment of these reduced numbers, and will the implications of the reduction be taken into account when evaluating other visa categories? While it is still in the early stages of analysing the data, the Migration Advisory Committee has noted initial indications suggest that changes to the student route will also impact total numbers. The Government has commissioned that Migrant Advisory Committee to review the financial requirements in the family and immigration rules, and has said no further changes will be made until the advisory review is complete. Although I have full confidence in the committee's ability to deliver a thorough review, the government must review the urgency with which it is acting. Delays are not in the best interest of the system. Past measures have shown decisive action can deliver significant impact on overall levels of migration. We must make sure we maintain a fair system and reduce migration where it is too high. Therefore, I ask the Minister, is there a clear timetable for the review, and will they assure the House that the Government will act swiftly to implement all and any recommendations from the committee? Whilst I would not want to preempt the remarks of the Minister, I expect she may allude to the levels of legal migration during the tenure of the previous government. We have been clear, these numbers were too high. We agree, and that is why we implemented the significant changes to visa rules, and we will work cooperatively across the House with the Government to further measures in this Parliament. The changes we made should be seen not as an endpoint, but as part of a longer process to reduce migration, to ensure the public has confidence that our immigration system is being managed effectively. If this process continues to reduce numbers and create a fair and more effective system, it will have our support. As I said, could the Minister kindly also outline if the Government is planning any further changes to our legal migration framework in the next year, either in data collection or visa eligibility? As I said at the start of this debate, legal migration, bringing in skills to key sectors, is not an issue. Indeed, my honourable friend and myself will be the first to back calls for more agricultural workers to deliver the right work we need. When I was in Central Asia, I saw myself the geopolitical benefits of bringing in people for seasonal workers, who also, from Central Asian countries, normally have about a 99% return rate. They want to come, they want to do the work, and they want to return home. And our farmers and agricultural industries want to receive their support. But migration must be managed in a way which protects the interests of the UK and our residents. This includes reducing the total number of migrants, which we accept has been too high in recent years. The reforms made by the Conservatives in the last Parliament have borne fruit, and they have been maintained by Labour. I hope the Minister will build on them and ensure our system is robust and fair as possible. Thank you.
Minister.
Thank you, Mr Pritchard. It is a pleasure to serve under your chairship, and to start by thanking the Honourable Member for Belfast South and Mid Down for securing this debate. And I do think it has been a very thoughtful consideration of the issues from members across the House. And I also do want to acknowledge what she did and how she helped with the community, her community, in August in those very difficult circumstances. I am grateful to her and all who have contributed today, and I will seek to address all the points that are raised, but I hope members will understand that in the time I have it may be difficult, and I certainly will come back in writing if there are points that are outstanding. If I could briefly deal with a few of the points raised before I go into more detail on my remarks in relation to the member for Belfast South and Mid Down's contribution. The honourable member, my honourable friend, the honourable member for Ilford South, some of the points he raised were also reflected on by others in terms of the quality of caseworking and the service received, we as members of Parliament have all experienced those cases and circumstances. So I'm glad that the issue that he raised has been resolved. But I would say that where there are any issues and concerns about whether the system is being fair and cases are being dealt with, that please do make sure you write to me on those matters, and we will certainly do that in a way that also enables us to learn from what could be happening better and implement those systems. In terms of the debate today as well, I think the point about public confidence that the Shadow Minister raised is incredibly important in relation to immigration, but that does come back to this point, which I think has been raised more broadly, about having an immigration system that is fair, that is humane, that is transparent, and that is compliant with the law and indeed international law. And I am keen to make this broader point, which is that it is important that we continue to have dialogue across the House on these matters. I think the matter of immigration needing and wanting to have a lot of cross-party support in how we're dealing with the challenges that are both in the interest of our economy, in the interest of fairness, but also important for our security, are matters in which it is important that we have open and transparent debate and take the input from colleagues across the House. Now, if I can, I will come back to other points that have been raised during the course of the debate. But if I can make this first point around net migration and some of the changes being made. The government does recognise, and I want to make this very clear about how we recognise and value the contribution that workers from overseas make to our economy and our public services. Our economy and our services, our NHS, would not function without them. But the point has been made, and we are very clear, that the immigration system does need to be properly managed and controlled. And that is important for public confidence too. We are clear that net migration and reliance on overseas recruitment needs to come down. And in addition to bringing down levels of overall net migration, this approach will also, that we are taking, will also help ensure that there are better and higher paid jobs for those who are already resident in the UK. In April this year, the previous government did introduce a package of changes aimed at reducing overall levels of net migration and tackling abuse in the social care sector. These changes included requiring any employer in England wishing to recruit international care workers or senior care workers to be registered with the Care Quality Commission and carrying out regulated activity, as well as removing the ability for care workers and senior care workers to apply with dependents. The package also replaced the previous shortage occupation list with the immigration salary list. The Home Secretary did confirm in July that the government is retaining these changes. We acknowledge concerns that have been raised and welcome to debates as we have had today. But also I think it's important in response to some of the issues that it's important to lay out where we are going further and taking a different approach, which is by establishing a new framework that will link the Migration Advisory Committee's work with the newly formed Skills England and skills bodies across the UK and the Industrial Strategy Council and the DWP to support a more coherent approach to migration, skills and labour market issues. If I can just broadly also make a point that was raised in relation to particular routes and the appendix for domestic abuse. What's also extremely important for members across the House as well is to ensure that we are tackling abuse on any routes. And in relation to what is an important safeguard in the system, we are very clear that there has to be a high threshold of evidence and that we take steps to tackle abuse wherever we detect that and wherever that occurs. And that is extremely important and an approach that is very clear across the Home Office. In relation to salary requirements, For too long, immigration has been used as an alternative to tackling skills shortages and labour market issues in the UK. The salary requirements that were raised in spring were in relation to the median salary for occupations, ensuring people continue to be paid at a higher rate than many in the occupation. And this, along with the immigration skills charge, are designed to ensure that employers look firstly at the resident labour market before looking at employing an international worker. And indeed, the points about the thresholds have been raised. I will just come back on a couple of points. The first is that for those who are new to the route since the 4th of April 2024, who must be paid $38,700 per year at the going rate for their occupation, whichever is higher, the salary floor can be reduced to 30,000, just over 30,000, depending on tradable points, such as discounts for new entrants. So there is some flexibility, and indeed those extending in the route, those working in health, care or education, who must be paid to 29,000 per year of the going rate for their occupation. Again, the salary floor can be lowered for roles on the immigration salary list. Those roles in health and education are also set on nationally or on nationally set pay scales or using tradable points. But it's important to make this point as well, that immigration remains a reserved matter, and we will consider the needs of the UK as a whole. And applying different immigration rules to different parts of the UK can complicate the immigration system, can harm its integrity and cause difficulty for employers who need the flexibility to deploy their staff to other parts of the UK. And the Independent and Expert Migration Advisory Committee has repeatedly recommended that we shouldn't operate different salary thresholds for different regions and nations across the UK. In relation to the fishing industry, I'm aware of the fishing industry's concerns about labour shortages. What I will say in the interest of time is that I will look forward to meeting my counterpart in DEFRA, and certainly happy to meet the Honourable Member as well. And in relation to the Afghan schemes, I think in the interest of time I will be happy to write to the Honourable Member in relation to that, but I'm very pleased that we were able to open that scheme and see the positive response to it. I'm just finally make this point about family immigration rules. As colleagues will be aware, on the 10th of September, the Home Secretary paused any further increases to the minimum incomes requirement and commissioned the MAC to review the financial requirements in the family immigration rules. This review will ensure that we reach the right balance and have a solid evidence base for any future changes to the minimum income requirement. And conducting a full review of the financial requirements, we expect to take approximately 9 months. And I would urge honourable members to provide views and evidence in response to the MAC's call for evidence, because I'm sure we will all agree that a rich evidence base is essential to ensure they are able to make effective recommendations, and we have policy that is informed by evidence. Thank you.
Hannah, to wind up.
Thank you very much, Mr Chairman, and thank you very much to all the members who have contributed. As the member said, it's about many things, many people and many places, and I think we all appreciate how complex this area of policy is, and I appreciate that there was a lot of detail back and forth, and I think it's important that we are able to talk about the detail in a constructive and open way and get back against the myth that you're not allowed to talk about these things, because it is important that we're open and honest with people about the impact it will have if we don't have workers in certain sectors. And I think the member for Westmoreland and Lonsdale put it well and said it's important that we don't obsess on the shallow politics, that we are about the practical realities. The member for Rutland and Melton is right to say, it is about finding consensus, and that is what personally I'm all about politically, and I think it's the best way to solve this. I don't think people are being negatively impacted, though I appreciate that there are pockets of it, and as I said, sometimes it's about directing the economic gains where they're needed in infrastructure terms, and I don't recognise all of the figures. By my calculations, about 1.2 dependents per worker, and quite often a couple comes and both of them work in social care. That's something I've found frequently. But I think the elephant in the room is probably, as the member for Hazel Grove put it, the lack of a long-term skills strategy. And this is, I mean, I think it's about, I mean, and many of the employers I deal with would love to have, you know, the skills on the doorstep and not go through the complexity, and we don't have that. But as I say, my intention was to ensure that the policies, when they change, reflect the economy that we have, and the challenges that people who are trying to create jobs, create wealth, and increase productivity in my region and any others are met halfway. And if the Minister doesn't mind, I'd be grateful if we could follow up on some of those specifics and see how we can facilitate those changes. Thank you.
Order. The sitting stands adjourned. Have a good evening. Thank you.